Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast. Today, you're going to hear my voice as the host and Miss Katie as my guest. And she is going to talk to us today about different types of learning styles. So, Katie, thanks for joining me.
I can't take it. Can you guys hear the I don't know what it is in her voice, but I love it. She's the host today and I am the guest, and this is very bizarre. But I was gonna do a solo episode on this for you guys, and we thought, what more fun would it be if Shelby got to interview me? So here we are. But thanks for having me, Shelby.
Yeah, thanks for showing up. So, Katie, tell us a little bit about what are learning styles?
Okay, so everybody has a different learning style. We've all heard about this, like the I learn by doing, or I learn by seeing, or, see one, do one. Everybody's kind of heard of these types of things. And I think we don't really take them super seriously after we're out of, elementary school or high school or whatever. But the way we learn and our learning styles applies to all different kinds of things throughout our life. And not only just when we learn new skills, but today we're going to talk about how that applies to us as instructors or therapists when we're working with our participants. And it's important to note that everybody has a learning style. So, Shelby, you have a learning style.
Mhm.
What's yours?
Tactile.
Tactile. So you're a doer.
Mhm.
You like to be able to do things to learn them. And I'm actually a pretty good blend, but I'm a visual person primarily. So I think in charts and pictures and graphs and things like that. But I'm a doer as well. And we are not neurodivergent people. We're just, typical adults. And so it's important to think about that everybody has a learning style. It's not just folks with disabilities. But I think it is especially important for our friends who might have a disability, or especially those who are neurodivergent. So I'm talking like autism, ADHD, even mental health diagnoses, depression, anxiety, Down syndrome, anything where the pattern of thinking may be different than you or I. And so if we can kind of nail down these different types of learnings and some different types of learning and different strategies, we can create kind of a blend of them to help appeal to everybody. Because again, if you're in a class teaching 3 different participants as an instructor, not all of them are going to have the same learning style. And so it's important we teach with a blend of them. And research actually tells us that if we use a blend of these different types of styles, that learning is more concrete.
So, you're talking about a blend of styles? What are the different styles?
Okay. So there's, you could Google it, and there's like a lot of different camps of people who
Sure.
think who have more than these 3, but the 3 biggies, I'm going to say, are visual, so you learn by seeing,
Okay.
auditory, you learn best by listening, and then kinesthetic or tactile, which is the doing piece of things. So kind of those are the 3 big ones we're going to talk about.
Do you feel like is there one of those learning styles that you feel like you see more often than others? Or is it like 33% of the population's this, 33?
Yeah. I would say that for us here at Hetra, we do, the majority of our participants have some type of disability. I would say that visual is a big one for us. And
Okay.
visual, learning visually, which we'll get into kind of some of the nitty gritty details of it, is more common, I would even say, across
Like
everybody,
general
across the
population?
population. I would say probably they go in order from visual, and then kinesthetic is probably the next most popular, and then auditory. I know a ton of auditory learners that they do best just sitting and listening.
Yeah, but how do we teach a lot? Lectures and
Unless you listen to
podcasts.
podcasts.
Okay, so follow-up question to that, and then I'll let you kind of get into the different styles. How much of a blend do most people have? So, like, you
Mhm,
can Google learning style test,
mhm,
right? And figure out, have a test tell you what type of learning style you are. And like for me, I am like almost 70% kinesthetic learner,
Really?
very, very high percentage kinesthetic learner,
Mhm,
which is shocking to me because I listen to tons of podcasts and audiobooks
mhm,
and I feel like I learn best seeing. But once I learned that about myself, I figured out I truly am better if I do it.
mhm.
So,
Question though,
yeah.
Do you listen to audio books and podcasts and things for fun, or do you listen to them to learn?
Both.
Both. Okay.
Both, yeah. So, I mean, I do a pretty good mix, but I am just curious, like, is that normal? So if you are a visual learner, are you
Mhm.
almost all visual, or
Mhm.
is there, like, a little bit of every like, the
Yeah.
blend, like you were
Right,
talking
right,
about?
right. So I would encourage everyone who's listening to go out and do a test. Like you can just Google it, like learning styles test, and there's a bunch of free ones all over the place. I'll link one that I like in the show notes from Education Tools, and that's the one I did. I did it pretty recently, and mine is really pretty skewed. It's like 40% visual and then 30/30
Interesting.
for the other two. So yeah, it is really interesting. And I would say, without polling, the entire world, that most people are a good blend, to really be someone like you that is, 70, 80, 90% in one category area, does it make learning difficult for you? I mean, how do you feel like that
Yeah,
impacts you? Or more of I won't say difficult, I will say like it takes more energy.
I think so. I've always been somebody that I like to learn. Like, I
Yeah,
love to learn.
lifelong
Yeah,
learner.
I always just like to learn. So I think it's not as difficult because I am, like, passionate about learning,
Mhm.
but I do remember, like, being in college and high school and, like, struggling through lectures and things
Mhm.
like that. Um, but I don't know, I guess I didn't that's how I've always learned. So I
Yeah.
guess I don't know that I would say it's more difficult for me, but I also like to learn, so I dedicate time to that.
And it doesn't mean that we can't learn the other
Right.
ways, right? It just means that it takes, number one, more energy and it might take more practice. So, like
Mhm.
you said, probably by the time you got to college, you're like, okay, this is the deal. I sit in a lecture and this is how I got to learn. And then you probably studied
Mhm.
for tests or something a different way.
Well, and I was a person that always like, anytime I studied or anytime I was even reading, like, I'm highlighting and I'm actually, like, making
Same.
my hands do something, and
Yeah.
I feel like that helped me too.
For sure. And I'm the same way. So if you are reading something or you're like, I love listening to podcasts and I love learning this way, but sometimes it's really hard for me because I want to take notes. I want to see it. I want to highlight it. I want to reread it, that kind
Mhm.
of a thing. And so, um, that's how I know that visual piece is really
Mhm.
important for me is because I like to see that information again. I like to, be able to, like you said, put my hands on it and look at it, which is that kinesthetic part.
Yeah.
So yeah, everybody has kind of a blend, and it's not to say they can't learn that way, but it is going to take longer for you to solidify a skill learning outside of your preferred method.
Interesting. Okay, so now tell us a little bit more in depth about each of the types of learning.
Okay. Let's start with visual. So, visual learners, that's me. We were just talking about that. These are going to be the people that say, like, that looks familiar, or let me see how that works. They want to look at it, they want to see all the intricacies of it, and they may have difficulty with that spoken direction. So, visual learners or kinesthetic learners, if that's prior or primary for them, you may get a lot of what, huh? What was that again? Because if you're only given verbal instructions and you don't have anything to anchor you back to it to be able to see it or do it, then you might ask some of those questions a lot or ask your instructor to repeat themselves. So, if we're thinking about things in the arena, I guess specifically, how do we tie this back to equine assisted services and you have a visual learner? And again, remember that our visual learners are pretty popular,
Mhm.
especially with our neurodivergent population. So, anybody who may have autism, ADHD, anything like that, visual anchors are going to be really, really important.
What is an anchor?
So an anchor is something that allows the information to be available for as long as the person needs it. So it
Okay.
might be something like if you're doing a pattern, you might draw it on a whiteboard,
Okay.
right? So I'm gonna draw my little cones in my barrel or whatever, and then maybe draw a path through that pattern. And that person then is able to anchor back to that picture anytime they need that
Sure.
information. So, number one, it's going to cut down on your what, huh? What am I doing next? And kind of confusion. But it's also going to allow that person to be able to learn those skills more quickly because they can anchor back to that visual reference point for them. And
Mhm.
that's how they learn best.
Cool.
So, anything you can do to increase the visual interest of your lesson, color coding,
Mm.
trot from blue to yellow, or using letters on the wall. A lot of people like to use dressage letters, or really anything you can put out there that will create a visual anchor point for them is helpful.
So is a visual learner, is that something like a storyboard would
Yeah.
be what you would use for a visual learner? Okay. Makes
Absolutely.
sense.
So that's a really good skill for transitions anyway, which is, not really necessarily what we're talking about specifically today. But again, gives them that anchor point. So I want to know what's next on my schedule. I want to know what the expectation is, and having little pictures on a storyboard, or having even just words like a checklist, anything like that where that person can see the information is going to help them learn it quicker.
Do you feel like this is a little bit off topic, but still on topic? Do you feel like people who are visual learners have more distraction from visual things? So, like, if you have a participant who's neurodivergent and they're a visual learner and the cat runs through the arena, do you feel like that creates more distraction for a visual learner than it would for an auditory learner?
Can, yes. But one thing to keep note is that if your person loses interest, so if your student or your participant loses interest in your lesson, say you're all standing in the middle of the arena and you're just verbally giving directions on what you're going to do today, that person is going to seek interest in
Something
in
else.
something else
Sure,
visual.
sure.
So like, because I'm more drawn to visual type stimulation, and I learn best through vision. If you're droning on and on about 2 point and not giving me any kind of visual information to look at to help me learn, I might start looking now at the birds flying around in
Mhm.
the arena, because
Okay.
that's much more interesting to me. So yes, it can be, like you said, kind of a distraction, but
Mhm.
I would encourage everybody to think of that more as it's like a default,
Right.
right? So it's more like, if we're losing their interest, or they can't anchor to something visual that is pertinent to today's lesson or helpful to them in some way,
Right.
they're just going to find it somewhere
Just yeah.
else.
Okay, so now let's move into auditory learners.
Okay, auditory. So they're going to learn by listening, obviously, and they're going to be our folks that say, sounds right. I've heard that before.
Mhm.
They might be really good with music lyrics, or, things like memorization, things like that. And they may or may not be the people that take notes, or like you said with you and me, like highlight things, or
Yeah.
that kind of a thing. They just prefer to sit and listen. And I would encourage everybody to remember that listening does not always require our eyes. So for our auditory learners, they may look like they're staring into space and not paying attention to you at all, but they are still receiving that auditory information.
Mhm.
Um, is it helpful to have eyes and ears together? Yes, because then you can use two strategies. You can use visual cues and you can use auditory cues, and we know that that's only going to help solidify learning. But we're not going to be naive enough to say that just because they're not looking at you doesn't mean they're not listening. So, one thing that can be really helpful for auditory learners is providing discussion, because listening to your own voice and your own
Yeah,
explanation of the directions is giving you a double whammy
right.
of auditory learning. I had some friends in college that, when we would prepare for finals and things, wanted to like give me a lecture.
Oh,
And that was like really helpful for them in
yeah.
their learning process, because that gives them that auditory, for them, that discussion and that, kind of rehearsal of it was really helpful for
And that
them.
kind of goes back to like if you can teach something, then you have learned it
Uh-huh.
sufficiently.
Yep, for sure. So, one thing that's interesting too about auditory learners is that we need to be aware of our tone of voice.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, so they're going to be very tuned in
Hmm.
to auditory information. So, the way we say things can be just as important as what we say.
Okay.
But I mean, really anything you can do to obviously increase auditory information, repeating yourself, question and answer is super productive. So if you do something like, tell me the 3 ways we stop our horse, something like that, that Q&A back and forth is really good. Just discussing and talking through things, and even having participants watch other participants and like narrate it,
Oh,
if
okay.
you
Yeah.
will. Like, some of that stuff can be really important, or really helpful for auditory learners. One thing I also really, really like, and this is for anybody, Shelby probably already knows what I'm going to say, but especially our participants who have autism or ADHD, an auditory cue that I use a lot is first then.
Yeah.
Using some kind of auditory anchor like that is helpful. So again, we're going back to that the anchor, right, which is helping kids or participants, any participant, remember those things. And that's kind of an anchor. It brings you back to that memory so that you can continue to learn. And first then can be really helpful. If you were watching live, I'm also doing it visually. So I like to use my fingers first, I point to my thumb, first this, and then my index finger, then this. And that ties together both the visual and the auditory. So right there, I'm teaching, if I was teaching to two participants and one was visual and one was auditory, doing something like that is teaching to both of those people.
Okay.
Come join us in Gretna, Nebraska for a hands-on EAS workshop March 13th through the 15th in 2025. As the EAS industry continues to expand and diversify, it is of utmost importance to keep the needs of our equine partners a priority. At our workshop, get a comprehensive look at all the aspects of successful equine welfare, including appropriate equine selection, proper training, conditioning, and integration into programming, learn how to do practical saddle fit for EAS, set weight limits for your horses, and so much more. Equine welfare strategies are hard to learn while sitting in a desk at a regular conference. We believe in the power of hands-on practice with equine skills in a collaborative environment where we can learn from each other. Attendees should expect a combination of valuable hands-on experience with our horses, classroom-based education, and individualized coaching to help solidify the workshop content. Get the entire 2.5 days of content for just $125 with our early bird registration discount available till January 1st. Discounts are available for audit-only positions as well as scholarship opportunities. If you're a member of our exclusive club at Patreon, make sure to use your additional $25 discount code. To register and get all the details, head over to hetrauniversity.org or click the link in the show notes below. We hope to see you in Gretna this March.
Okay, so now my favorite, kinesthetic.
Kinesthetic. You can probably teach me more about this than I can teach you, but these are the try one people. Like they're the people that are going to say like, I'm getting the feel of this. Okay, I'm starting to get, I feel they're kind of a touchy feely sort of a thing. They may prefer to like build it or do it, draw it even, like we talked about highlighting, things that they can get their body moving in the learning process is going to be ideal for them. So if you think about what we're doing on the horses, I mean, the horses are riding, horseback riding is one of the most kinesthetic, activities ever. You're getting so much input all the time. But I also think that that horseback riding for kinesthetic learners can be a little bit challenging because we know that riding is kind of a feel.
Right.
How many, horsemanship skills do you know, Shelby, that's like it's hard to teach because it's more of a feel?
Yeah, a lot.
Mhm.
And that makes sense to me too because there's so much and I've ridden horses my entire life, so as a kinesthetic learner, I guess I never really thought through that, but there's so many different things to feel. I could think it could be overstimulating or like overwhelming to your body
Mhm.
because there's so many different things that you're trying to feel.
For sure. I'm still pretty high kinesthetic learning. And so for me, when I'm doing horseback riding and working on horsemanship skills specifically, it's like until I feel that and I know it's correct, I don't know.
Doesn't click.
Yeah, it doesn't click. Like I remember when I was learning like my lead departures for lope and canter and that kind of thing. And until someone could tell me like, yeah, do you feel that one shoulder moving more forward or, until they explained some of that to me and I could see it, feel it, and then I did it, then that's when it really clicked for me. And so it can be tricky in what we do with equine assisted services because we have to manage safety.
So do you feel like, and this might be kind of a side question too, but listen to me, do you feel like how many,
See?
I say it all the time. I
Uh-huh.
feel like, or do you feel like interesting? Okay. So do you think that, a kinesthetic learner, you have to be more selective on your horse's movement pattern than you would be on somebody that's an auditory or visual learner? It doesn't make that much of a difference.
I would say for my kinesthetic learners, I'm not as concerned about the type of movement, like whether it's concussive or smooth or that type of a thing. But I might be thinking a little bit about my horses that ask more questions
Mhm.
with their body. Does that make sense? So let's say we're working on, I don't know, hind crossovers.
Mhm.
And so when we're first learning those skills for my kinesthetic learner, I want a horse that's going to try really hard for me, even with approximations.
Okay.
Because I want them to be able to feel what is correct about that. But we also know that being able to feel what's incorrect, I guess, is helpful as well. But until you feel that correct movement, I think that's when you really start to have that click that you can start to fine tune those skills a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So now that we've talked about all three of these, I have two questions. So my first question is, do you think that I was just about said, do you feel? Do you think that visual learners do better with instruction at the halt
Mm.
and kinesthetic learners do better with instruction at the walk? And where do audio or auditory learners fall in?
Yes. So I would say that with our kinesthetic learners, it's going to be best for them to keep moving. So anything you can do to provide them movement while they're listening to auditory information, or even while they're looking at visual information. Obviously, we have to be safe. But yes, the movement is going to help them, because we know when we go back to our auditory learners, that if they don't have movement, they're just going to find it somewhere
Mhm.
else. And it sounds a lot like sensory. If you're thinking to yourself like, this sounds like a sensory thing versus a learning thing, that's because they're very closely related. And so the way that our bodies prefer sensory information, it really does contribute to the way we prefer to learn. And so if my participant is a kinesthetic learner and I'm making them stand at a halt in the middle of the arena for 5 minutes while I talk about 2-point, they might need to practice 2-point at the halt while we're talking about it, or they might need to keep walking around the arena while we're talking about it. And again, that kind of comes back to, just because you don't have their eyes doesn't mean they're not listening,
Mhm.
right? So we just have to be more comfortable with that. Or, like we said earlier, provide a mix, because you are
Mhm.
going to have some people that movements might be distracting for them, because they need to be able to, visual learners, because they need to be able to be stationary to see what
Right.
it is you're talking about. They're going to benefit more from demonstration
Right.
versus our kinesthetic or our auditory learners.
Okay. Then my next question is, how early in a person's life do these things start to declare themselves?
Good question. I actually don't know. I'd have to look up the research, but my educated guess would be very early.
So like you're born a visual learner or you're born a kinesthetic learner or
I think that it's definitely something that develops
okay.
over time. I think infants and, if we look at like infants and toddlers, they are definitely kinesthetic learners. They
Mhm.
need to touch things, they need to feel
Yeah.
things, because that's the way their sensory systems are developing. And then as we get older and we start to get more finesse with all of those things, obviously, like infants and toddlers don't learn by auditory because they don't understand all of
Right.
the language that they might need to know. But as we get older, that stuff does change. And I know that like my learning styles have changed even since I was in grad school compared to now that I'm out of grad school, because I'm just not doing as much lecture learning as I used to,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of one of those things that like whatever muscles you flex, you do get a little bit better at, but you'll always kind of have a preference that you have to use less energy,
Mhm.
or you learn things quicker always in one way.
Okay, so you've talked a little bit in each learning style about how this relates back to EAS and neurodivergent individuals, but do you have anything else to add to that for different learning styles for neurodivergent individuals?
Yeah. So for me, this all sounds like a bunch of like nice to know information. And I know that it can be a little frustrating as instructors where you're like, I know all this information. But we, at the end of the day, are teaching, as instructors, or providing therapy. If you're a therapist listening, this applies to everybody. When we're learning new skills, it's really important to understand these learning styles as it pertains to difference in thinking, because we know that those people that are neurodivergent, they have differences in thinking. Like, let's talk about autism specifically. Can be more rigid and concrete, and that type of a thing. And so if we understand kind of autism to its core, we kind of understand the diagnosis and what that means, we can deploy all the strategies we want, like using sensory strategies or using fidgets or transition, things like a visual schedule. We can deploy all these strategies, but it all seems really willy-nilly until you understand at the very core of it, like, how does their brain work best?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we think about kids with autism, the auditory piece of things isn't. It just research says it's not the best for them. Participants with autism struggle more with that social communication piece, the auditory portion of that. And so just listening to you drone on for 20 minutes about the posting trot, it's at the end of the day, it's just not going to work with them. I don't care how many strategies,
Right.
other types of strategies you use. So if we look at each of these diagnoses, fundamentally and foundationally and try to understand them and then, work from the bottom of the pyramid up, we're looking at their learning preferences and how their cognitive processes work and what's preferred for them in that way. And then we look at, kind of sensory and regulation, and we go all the way to the tippy top of that pyramid. And at the very top is education and learning. And so obviously that's what we want. We want to be able to teach our participants new skills, or we want to be able to, therapeutically help them in some way with whatever activity or thing that we're doing. And so if we want to do that, we need to understand all of the rest of the pyramid.
Okay, so that's all really good information to have. So I'm not a therapist.
Mhm.
How do I learn that stuff? Where can I go to learn that stuff that's going to be applicable to what I do every day for EAS?
It's hard. I'm going to be honest, it's hard. So as an instructor, whatever certifying body you go through should be providing you some type of disability education. Whether, how thorough that is different across all of the different certifying bodies. And so we have to kind of do our own footwork, and it might look like YouTube videos. It might look like, attending some different courses or conferences or things like that. But what bothers me, I think, the most about all of that is that it doesn't relate back to what we do.
Yeah. Every day what we do, it's different. It's so unique.
It is.
So unique.
What we do in EAS is so different. And I can tell you guys, I've been to the conferences, I've sat through the, online, CEUs and webinars and all those things. And maybe an expert on autism, maybe a psychologist or someone comes on and talks about it. But what does that mean in the arena,
Right.
in our sensory rich environment with all of these variables and a 1,200-pound living creature? And how do I manage 3 people on 1,200-pound creatures at the same time?
And your volunteers
Yeah,
and everybody else.
it's just such a unique situation. And so sometimes I feel like people leave those conferences and those courses like, great, but now what?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I kind of knew that. I kind of knew that, people who have autism, struggle with sensory stuff. I knew that, but how do I help them? What do I do now? And we don't by any means want people to, like, if you're an instructor, we're never going to teach you how to be a therapist and,
Right.
Remediate those things. But there are tools and strategies and things that we can use as instructors, or lay people that are super beneficial and can help our kids with autism stay safe and get the most out of what they can with EAS, which is what we want.
Very cool. So does Tetra University offer anything like that?
Hey, thanks for asking. I am really, really, really excited, you guys. We are going to start offering some mini courses on a variety of different things, and we are going to kick things off in 2025 with a course on participants who have different learning styles, specifically those who are neurodivergent. So we're going to cover a lot of different diagnoses. Autism and ADHD will be probably heaviest, but we're also going to touch on other learning disabilities, dyslexia, dysgraphia, things like that, and also those that just learn differently. So Down syndrome, like I said earlier, depression, anxiety, OCD, even some of those.
Mhm.
And the important thing to remember is just that all of those diagnoses have differences in learning, and it's not a bad thing. Everybody learns differently. Shelby, you learn differently than I
Yeah.
do. And so for me to be the best instructor to you, I need to learn more about you. I need to learn how you learn best and what works for you. And there are strategies out there that I can use to help. And so that's kind of the idea is just that the course is going to be, it's designed for anybody those who work with anybody who is neurodivergent. And we know that autism and ADHD from the survey this year is the highest served population right now in the equine assisted services industry. And so we felt compelled to put some information out there to help people be more successful. It's tricky. It can be hard. There's a lot of different things. I mean, even just in the last 20 minutes, we've talked about, probably 50 different strategies, right? So it's complex, but what we're going to try to do is make it really simple, and just help people understand the foundational skills so that you can get to the tip of that pyramid and help your participants on a more specific level. Once you get to the arena, you feel like you have those skills.
Cool. So where can people find information about that course?
Yes. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes below, and it's going to have some additional information about what the course entails. Basically, we're looking at a series of webinars. It's going to be all online, all self-paced. You get through it as fast or as slow as you want to, but it is going to run kind of on a 4-week schedule. So at the end of that 4 weeks, we're going to do a live call where we're going to talk about some case studies. I'm going to answer questions and help people kind of troubleshoot things. But throughout that 4 weeks, you're going to have access to webinars, downloadable PDF handouts. We're going to have a community. So there's going to be everyone who's in the course will have a community to chit chat together about questions and troubleshooting things. And then I can pop in there in that community too and kind of help throughout those 4 weeks. But really what I think is most cool about it is that it's going to be an opportunity for people to get the information that I feel like people really want in a way that is convenient for their schedule and is ultimately really helpful. If you've attended any of my autism or ADHD talks, we're going to get some of that foundational learning, but really, like I said, what the point is that we gain an understanding that can help people troubleshoot the specific problems that they're dealing with in their centers, and help EAS in general be a more productive, more successful, safer activity for everybody. And yeah, that's what I hope people will get out of it, I guess.
Cool. Well, I think that's all the questions I have today, unless you have anything last minute to add.
No, I don't. So like I said, that link will be in the show notes. It's only $49, guys. So it's going to be, because this is our first course that we're doing, I'm really hoping a lot of people will join us and help us kind of decide if this is something that the EAS community really needs or wants. And so share it with a friend. Click on that link in the show notes and enter your email in there, and you'll get all the information that you need to sign up. We are going to open the sign up for this course January 1st.
Cool.
So January 1, 2025 is when signups will open. Again, $49. So I hope you guys will join us.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast for today.
All right. Bye, everyone.
That's all for today. But until the next episode launches, scroll down to the show notes and click on the link to get plugged in with us on Facebook, Instagram, or our exclusive educational club at Patreon. This podcast is presented by Hetra University, the educational arm of Heartland Equine Therapeutic Riding Academy in Gretna, Nebraska. Hetra University's mission is to provide high-quality educational offerings to the EAS community. Check out all the Hetra University has to offer at www.hetrauniversity.org.